Anyways, I want to look at that Tettles bolstering video before we start gaming. Can bolstering be saved?
All right, let's talk today about, is the affix bolstering actually salvageable? So on the reset, I made a video talking about, this week in Mythic Plus, and we kind of talked about bolstering, kind of the implications of what
I actually do think bolstering is salvageable.
was going.
I know maybe kind of a hot take because I think bolstering is horrible right now. I just think it's doing too much. Like, and that might make you laugh because it used to also increase the health of the mobs and shit, and it also used to be like permanent, I think, and it didn't even wear off. But I think a affix that makes you have to focus down priority targets and really focus on that, I think is fine. It's just the punishment is way too big. Like, the reality is in most of these dungeons, you end up just like getting one mob alive at the end and it just kills your whole group. And that's just like super bullshit. But then you could also say it's a high key scaling thing. Like, for example, are you scared of bolstering in like a 15 or a 20, which is like that's who does the most amount of Mythic Plus is those keys. But like I bet in 20s you could definitely get owned by bolstering. So I don't know. I just think it's overtuned. I think like for example, I think you could cut bolstering in half or in a quarter. It would still be challenging. It would make you play the keys differently and it wouldn't be as bullshit or as unfun.
To happen with bolstering, and there's been actually a decent amount of negative community feedback and negative community sentiment among the affix, and I think now is probably a good time to talk about, is the affix really salvageable? Is it one that can actually be reworked in the world within to probably be something that's a bit better or a bit more well-rounded with just how affixes are currently performing? Blizzard has stated a couple of times at this point now that they want you to be focusing a lot more on the dungeons and a lot less on the affixes. I think by and large they've done an okay job with this.
I think that, so limited experience. I haven't done a ton of live Mythic Plus in my experience in WoW. I've only really done it in like the tournament setting. This is actually one of the few times I've really grinded live keys because I love playing the game a lot. I think they have done that. Of all the keys I've played, I feel like I am doing the dungeons and not the affixes. But bolstering is a big change. Like, bolstering is you change your entire routing to not bolster things, which again is kind of the point of affixes, right? As long as it doesn't like, if it didn't massively increase difficulty, I feel like making your routes different to accommodate for something is kind of interesting. Like, that's fun to do. Like, I actually look forward to that. Maybe a lot of people don't, but like, if a key's like really owning us, I'd be like, okay, let's like rebuild this and make a lot more sense, I guess. I don't know. I also think that there's certain mobs that are like anytime you have to pull mobs on top of other mobs, like they shouldn't bolster, or like that bolstering should be nerfed or some way. Like pulling, there's that one pull and fall, not the first pull to the right after you kill the first boss, but like the second, the third, is it the fourth portal? The one where there's the second one from the left where there's the big caster guy and then it's surrounded by like a few leeches and some other things. And that mob is guaranteed to get bolstered because of the health difference, and that's the one that puts out the massive fortified dot that you have to dispel that just like fucking destroys you. Like those, you can't just have bolstering be an affix and have that be a pull. It's just kind of bullshit. So like, or like maybe that mob should work differently with bolstering. Like the fact that it's different across the board, or that some pulls screw you, is really bad.
There are some exceptions.
Because like bolstering isn't like, I don't know, have you guys done a Taldazar? A Taldazar isn't bullshit with bolstering. A Taldazar is like actually kind of a fine key, depending on your route. Like even pulling the like little beanie boys on the when you go left, I just think that a Taldazar has like that some keys feel fine. Like bolstering exists, but it's not horrible. And then some keys, it's as if it was made without even realizing that bolstering was a thing, which actually, funny enough, was the case. This dungeon was made almost 10 years ago. It actually was made 10 years ago. It was made in the development process for WoD, which is in 2013. So, they were not considering bolstering. So, I don't know, especially older dungeons, you have to pay more attention.
I think that Raging is maybe in a little bit of a weird spot where there is some counterplay, but there's not a ton of counterplay. And a lot of people actually have experiences like you're seeing on screen right here, where you're trying to play a dungeon of this week's set.
I mean, this is just insane.
You go into Everbloom, and you bolster up the Abomination, and it does Noxus Eruption with 4 stacks because you have Dread Petals in the pull, and the Dread Petals have 30% of the HP of the...
Dread Petals just shouldn't bolster. That's the easy solution. Dread Petals bolstering is just weird.
Of the Abominations, and then you get farmed by the pack until bolstering eventually falls off, and then you are able to farm the pack. Same thing happens in Darkheart Thicket with the Grizzlies. I've seen some stuff happen in Waycrest Manor with Matron Alma. That's in front of Soulbound Goliath. I think that Everbloom is probably the worst offender of bolstering this season, but I think that bolstering with this dungeon set is not great. especially with how it currently works. Now, from Blizzard's perspective, they have nerfed it a few times, and they've tried to get this on-death affix into a state where it is less about the affix and it is more about the dungeon. And there is a question as to whether or not players are going to complain about the worst affix almost uniformly. Or is this something that, regardless of what was actually said about the affix itself, would JB still be tweeting about the worst affix? If it was incorporeal, would Blizzard say something? Would JB be tweeting about incorporeal? Because right now he's saying, I think Blizzard would be a lot less inclined to keep bolstering around if they had to deal with similar stuff in their lives. Like each person at your morning standard meeting took 20% longer than
JB is so good at Twitter.
the person before them, and I bet bolstering is gone before the end of this week. Now, they have done actually a couple of good things with bolstering over time. Like, bolstering no longer increases the health of affected enemies. This was a change that happened coming in.
That's crazy to me. It is crazy to me that existed. I had barely any interaction with this version of bolstering, because like what they would do back then is in certain keys. So again, I didn't do live keys for a ton of time. I only heard people complain about bolstering, and if I ever had to do like a live key to farm gear, I would just avoid that week entirely. Like I literally wouldn't play. And then in a tournament format, whenever we started like preparing all the maps in the map pool, if 2 of them were bolstering, we would just perma-ban those maps. Like that was just the solution, was you just wouldn't do it. So I've avoided bolstering like my entire WoW life until this week. So it's hidden me like a truck, and it's like an infinitely nerfed version from what it was.
1. It was one that the community was kind of talking about for a while. That
You're
needed
covering
to change
Tettles?
with
Oh, good
bolstering.
shout.
It was previously health and damage. In addition to that, in 9.1.5, bolstering was created to temporarily be on the mobs for 20 seconds when it was previously infinite.
Yo, speaking of bricks, I heard that BDG killed Fyrak, and the brick guy showed his goddamn brick again.
Community.
Let's fucking go.
Of course we're
Hey, my weapons.
It's fucking over.
I got the easy 81 in the gosh.
And so that was actually a pretty good change. And on top of that, yeah, it just was added to have a duration. I've looked back through the changelog on bolstering on Wowhead, and there's a lot that's changed with it. So I remember when it got nerfed from 45 yards to 30 yards, allowing you to CC mobs and just kind of move away from them before, just to make sure that the mobs didn't get bolstered. And that was a strategy for a while where you would have
Dratnos
one
Guild
mob
also got
attack that
Fyrak?
you would
I know.
CC, and then
There's no brick
then
there
you would
though.
play it solo to make sure it didn't get bolstered. And that was a strat that was implemented for a while, but then players eventually, bolstering has been changed a lot. And credit to
I just feel like bolstering still stands out. Like if the whole purpose of affixes is you want to progress the dungeon and not the affix, bolstering is like kind of the one that is like that. Like they even nerfed Sanguine recently, so it doesn't stack anymore and it lasts a shorter amount of time, right? So like if you have a mob in 6 Sanguines, it's only going to heal as if it was in one of them. Like that's a pretty fucking huge nerf. And I think Sanguine still changes the way you do dungeons a bit, and maybe Sanguine is still like a little bit too involved, but bolstering to me stands out head and shoulders above everything else, at least playing like above 25s. I've heard like incorporeal is like a big problem in lower keys, but like in higher keys, incorporeal is like kind of free. It just doesn't do anything because you're just going to CC it. It's kind of like the Anduin problem, right? Like Anduin CCing those souls in P1 just wiped guilds for like weeks on end, but like a top guild is just not going to wipe to that. They're going to wipe to other things. There's like a certain level of coordination with CCs and stops that when you get to a certain level, it is just automatic, and at a lower level, it's like all you're focusing on. So like I think incorporeal, I mean, but that's the thing though, like if the majority of people do 15 to 20s and incorporeal farms them, like is it a good affix, right? You could ask that question too, because like same thing with bolstering. Like bolstering obviously ramps and gets infinitely more bullshit the higher the key you go because of multiplicative scaling.
Bolstering has been changed a lot to where it's not like the world's largest time loss on paper, right? Like the mobs aren't gaining HP whenever you mess up bolster killing them, but it still is a massive time loss. And I think that there are reasons that it's a time loss, and let's kind of talk about a couple of them. First and foremost, it requires you to kind of reroute a dungeon. If we go back to Everbloom, this area, I've seen a lot of
like
people
that though.
basically stop pulling drops.
I like that though. The thing is, okay, so Everbloom is bad mainly because of those blossoms, but like I feel like people so yes, it's bad. Even at the highest level, it's bad. But also, I feel like a lot of people zone into Everbloom and they just like rip their normal route and then obviously die and don't think about it. And I think affixes again, not excusing bolstering and Everbloom, I think affixes that make you rethink your routing are really cool. Or at least that part of it is very cool, and I wish more of them did that, just like even small things. But I mean, Everbloom still has, Everbloom has one problem really, and it's just that the plants bolster with that little HP. That's it. They just fix that and it's probably fine.
Red petals because of this, and instead they're having to pull basically every other mob in the dungeon. And this is something that's a bit awkward for players, especially players who don't play a ton. Now, for players like myself who play pretty much every week, almost regardless of what we're doing, it's probably fine. We're going to reroute around the dungeon. Bolstering is the hardest affix, but that's maybe something that's salvageable, right? Whenever you're talking about is bolstering savable, if it's the hardest affix, it probably could just be nerfed to be savable, right? Where you don't have weird interactions.
Yeah, I think bolstering is savable. Like here, I don't know, how much health do mobs get right now by bolstering? Or sorry, not health. How much damage do they get per mob that bolsters them? I'm not even talking about Everbloom or Waycrest specifically having issues with those mobs at 20. I don't know, make that shit 10.
And stuff like that actually get affected.
Nerf it in half. Let's start there. Just cut that shit in half. Fix the Everbloom mobs, fix the Waycrest mobs. Is bolstering still a bane of everyone's existence if it's literally nerfed in half? Like, I don't know. I think it's salvageable because I still think it has a positive, which is even at 10%, it would still make you rethink the way you pull some stuff. Or it would still make you, like, it's kind of what raging is. Like, what raging does poorly, bolstering kind of does well, right? Raging makes you want to focus on the end of pulls, and, like, that makes the end of the pull the hardest part. Raging is really problematic for a lot of reasons. I really don't like raging. I think like having your CC just not work is super annoying. There's not a ton of soothes in the game, especially AoE soothes. But like bolstering at a nerfed in half state would still make you think about how you approach the end of a pull. The kicks at the end of the pull would matter so much more than the kicks at the beginning. I think that's fine. I think that's actually like okay. It's just that it just does too much.
Did by bolstering or something weird of the sort.
Or they could make it a tank affix and their melee damage gets increased by 20%, and it's more of like your tank needs to like think about the dungeon differently rather than casts that are killing the entire group.
And to Blizzard's credit as well, they normally go and try to impact the mobs that are doing on death affixes.
I'm just cooking
them
though.
A little bit
something like that.
Less problematic. Like the dread petals, I'm surprised that they do on death affixes. I think is one that's a bit shocking, but Blizzard more often than not is kind of fine at that. Now. The reason that it's so hard and so annoying is because you have to reroute the key every single week if once bolstering shows back up. And so for like Everbloom, you play a lot fewer dread petals, and instead you're going to be maybe gnarl roots on the table. I'm not saying necessarily that it is, but it could potentially be. And that's just functionally with how bolstering works. It's going to be something that you're going to see is that, you know, like gnarl root might be on the table. You might have to slow pull the Waycrest Manor courtyard instead of doing the dogs with a trash pack. Instead you were doing the dogs solo. Or instead of doing Matron Alma with the dogs, you have the tank taunt Matron Alma, and as somebody that...
Dude, you want to know something that's kind of weird? You know how I've been on the... Well, I guess, okay, there's like a few affix camps in general. There's remove all affixes, there's make kiss curse affixes, there's make positive affixes, and there's like keep affixes roughly the same, I guess, and just like make them, nerf them, kind of like what they did in Season 2, or going into Season 2. I don't think I'm on... I used to like entertain the idea of just removing all the affixes. I actually am not a fan of that. I think affixes do... I think my perspective has changed a little bit by doing it a little bit this season. That I feel like it would actually just be boring as fuck if every week there was literally nothing different. No Fortified, no Tyran, nothing. I even think the difference between Fortified and Tyran is kind of interesting. I just think Tyran is boring. I wish Tyran wasn't as boring as it is. But like I understand why those two things exist. But... yeah, so I think I'm more on the line of like them keeping current affix. I think like if they're gonna ever experiment with positive affixes only, I would want them to like try it in like a little mini season before they ever rip it on like a main season, like maybe a faded angle, like try it for faded season. Like I'm not super sure that. And then we could, I mean, there's like seasonal affixes and like an entire conversation. We've had this conversation a million times, so maybe we'll have it again soon on the potty.
And taunts the dogs off of the tank and
potty
takes
seat.
them 35 yards or 30 yards away to make sure that they don't bolster them off. And then you have your 4-man group just kind of tanking these two dogs to make sure they're not bolstering Matron Alma so they don't kill your tank. So stuff like that. Those are the reasons that it's like a time loss, right? It's not a time loss in the sense of it's adding HP to the dungeon, but it's a time loss in the sense of how you're playing the dungeon is almost antithetical on bolstering to how you play it on any other week.
Yeah.
That, to me, is problematic. I think that... to most players, I think that simplifying the process would probably be a little bit easier, right? Where it's not changing so drastically from week to week to from affix to affix, and I think that that's something that Blizzard has done a pretty good job of. But I think that bolstering is still a relic of the past in that regard. I personally do not think that bolstering is savable in this dungeon set.
Interesting.
I think that this
dungeon set.
I do not think that they...
No, that really, because I feel like this dungeon set, if you make the Waycrest dogs not bolster and you make the flowers not bolster, which is, they've done that before. They have retroactively made mobs not bolster in Sanguine and shit. Like, if you were to do that in this dungeon, I think that would be fine. What is the only pull I can think of that is bad as fuck for bolstering that isn't involved in Waycrest and Everbloom? It's like Galakron's Fall and Rise, right? It's like the second room in Galakron's Fall, and it's the little mini bosses in Rise that are bad for sure. Bolstered Sentinels. Oh yeah. Wait, does Bolstered Sentinels increase the amount on the Healing Absorb, or the damage that the Healing Absorb does, or both? Does it do both? Both would be fucking oh yeah, the bolstered swell guys in Throne. You're right, yeah.
Could have designed a worse set of dungeons for bolstering ever. Like this, the way that bolstering works with these mobs is, and how you're pulling a lot of these trash packs is very bad. There are a lot of packs that have like pretty low HP mobs mixed in with high HP mobs, and I think it's just a situation that Blizzard can very rarely actually have a victory whenever they're trying to design interesting dungeons, and they have to think about what bolstering's implication is for every single situation. Yeah, so I think that bolstering is probably not personally, I think it's probably not savable.
I also think bolstering on Fortified is just really shitty. Like, bolstering on Tyran would feel infinitely better, but the Fortified combo with bolstering makes it so much worse. And didn't they used to, sorry for the flashbang, it's Tettles' fault. Didn't they used to do something with that? Didn't they ban certain affix combos? Here's how I know. We did a dungeon in the MDI that the community voted on affixes for, and it was absolute hell on earth. It was Waycrest, Fortified, Necrotic, Raging. And as far as I could tell, that could not exist on live. Like, Necrotic Raging could not happen together when those existed. That was old Raging, where they did like 100% damage under 30%. So like, why can bolstering happen on Fortified? It like almost makes, you know, I guess you're just saying they could just nerf it too, and that would also solve the problem. But I don't know.
It's probably not. Personally, I think it's probably not savable. And I think that it's kind of been proven that players are. If you look at Season 1, you see that big decline in Mythic Plus runs and that spike back up. This is due to like...
What is this graph? Mythic Plus runs per week. Season 1, down, then... Wait, so there's a couple of interesting... I haven't seen this graph before. Why is Week 2, Season 1 so low? Week 2, Season 1 was Christmas? It was Christmas week, but only over the weekend. But yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. And then it jumps back up and then goes down. And then Dragonflight Season 2... was like 1, 2, and then okay, 3, 4, and 5 and 6 for Season 2 are weird. I believe Diablo came out right around here, so that's a big reason for that. And then Baldur's Gate later that month, and then Season 3 went like bap, and then it sustained. Why did it sustain? Og was not in this line at all. Why did this sustain? I guess it's like, well, I can tell why it. So usually in an expansion, the starting number of Mythic Plus runs per week would go first patch, second patch, third patch. The reason it jumped up is because of BlizzCon, and there was a bunch of hype around WoW in general. That's why that jumped up. But as far as it not going down as much, I think Season 3 dungeons are pretty well liked, and also Season 3 gearing. I think they fucking nailed the gearing system. I think this upgrade system is infinitely better than last patch and far better than any like Valor Point system that's ever existed. It's so fucking good, and I think that wants you to keep logging in every week. So I think that matters for sure. I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. It's interesting though.
A tyrannical bolstering week from memory, where players have proven time and time again that they're not necessarily willing to play bad affix weeks, right? And the amount of players that are going to be playing bad affix weeks is going to sharply decline. I'm very interested in seeing what the stats are about to look like for week 5 here.
I can tell you it's going to go way down, because I had been doing like pug keys for like a few weeks, and not only does like every patch drop players every week, I mean that's just like what every patch does, but specifically bolstering is like, I hope Blizzard reacts to this information too. I think this number is going to go way down. I've seen group finders. It is infinitely harder to find healers and tanks from my stream chat than it was like a week or two ago. last week in the reset before. Same amount of viewers, everything. And when I'm just like, yo guys, let's go do a key, there's literally like a fourth of the signups. And when I ask people why, it's like bolstering exists.
We have bolstering finished because Mythic Plus has been in a very healthy state, and we're actually having more and more completions of Mythic Plus than even in Season 1, which is surprising because Season 1 is typically when people start playing the game, right? And so the fact that we've had this many runs being done is a very positive sign of a very healthy Mythic Plus game, and that's great, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
However, whenever people then see bolstering and they're like, this isn't fun, I'm not willing to play this, that's a problem. And I think that, like, raging is hard, right? Raging was hard, and I think that if you don't have an evoker, it's challenging. Raging storming was kind of annoying, but at the same point, there's counterplay, right? So first off, you can bring out an evoker.
I didn't
Secondly,
mind raging storming. Like raging, I think is just kind of not fun, but
just make sure that whenever mobs are about to
I
rage,
didn't
you
mind.
can
I
do
mean, even
something
as
about it.
I mean, I guess DH has
And I
less
think
of an
that
issue with
the
storming than most
thing
people.
that bolstering lacks the most is that for a lot of situations, the counterplay is to not have pulled that pack, rerouted the dungeon in a different manner, or done something completely different with the key, or maybe in some instances not even zoned into that dungeon. And I think that feels a bit weird whenever there's little to no counterplay for the bolstering affix, and it feels really bad whenever there's a mob that's like super high priority in a dungeon, and then the mobs around it, like once you kill that mob off, then those mobs get bolstered up, and like that feels a bit weird.
All right, I think we're
mobs like
kind
the
of through
Colossus
this.
and a Taldazar.
I think we're kind of through this. I don't know if I agree with him that it's unsalvageable. I think bolstering is salvageable as an affix, but this season it specifically is bad. But I don't know what else they can do really to change it besides a few of those mobs. Like, you're not gonna make the like little hobgoblin dudes in Throne not bolster, but like you definitely should make the Waycrest dogs, dude. Okay, here's another question. Maybe we're getting this week, but like where the I really feel like, I don't know, like there's no impending patch coming up. You have a long time until War Within. Fated historically has not had as many people working on it. Like where are the like there are very obvious problems in dungeons right now, right? Like probably even I think the biggest problem right now is in Galakron's Fall. You can do this in Pugs. I've been finding it fascinating. Just go into Pugs, do Dawn of the Infinite, and do Manifested Time Ways, and look at how many people, just count. Look at how many people get dispelled with Chrono Fated and fucking one-shot themselves because they don't know to stay still. Because the Dungeon Journal doesn't tell you to stay still, right? It doesn't say anything about that. You literally one-shot yourself if you move, and if you stay still, you take 0 damage. And there's nothing in the game that's telling you to do that, and it's very unintuitive. Like, how is it not changed to where if you're getting moved when you dispel that, you just one-shot yourself? It's fucking insane. Doubt the devs even know? There's no fucking way. They watch enough streams and have heard people mention it. I've, like, showed a, like... Actually, no, they definitely know. Because 2 of them were in my chat talking about some shit. Encounter designers. And I wasn't talking to them directly, but I was showing a correct way to stay still and the incorrect way of moving on stream and how it interacted with it. They definitely know about it. They didn't like comment on it, but like they were fucking here and I just showed it. So maybe they weren't paying attention, but